Hi guys, my name is Elise. Welcome back to another week with the Foundry Kids and welcome to week 3 of our April series called Community Garden. In this series, we are talking about humility and what it means to be humble, and we are talking about lots of examples of when Jesus showed humility. And humility is putting someone else's needs ahead of your own needs or wants. And Jesus did that a ton in the Bible. We just came from the Easter story, which shows us Jesus definitely putting our needs and wants ahead of his own. And we are going to talk about some more examples of when Jesus practiced humility today. But before we do that, we're going to stand up and sing a song.
All right, everybody, clap your hands now. Let's make some waves together. Let's change the world. Come on. God, I'm so amazed by your goodness. I love the way that you love me. I got this joy flowing deep in my soul now. Yeah. I just want the world to see. Here we go. With your love inside me, I know I can change the world. So everybody, come on, every boy and girl, let's give this a whirl. We're making waves, no stopping, keep moving along. Making waves, everybody, all people belong. Yeah, we got a lot of life to live and a lot of love to give. We're making waves. Come on. Whoa. We're making waves. Here we go. God, I'm so amazed by your goodness. I love the way that you love me. I got this joy flowing deep in my soul now. Deep in my soul. Come on. I just want the world to see. Yeah. With your love inside me, I know I can change the world. I know I can change the world. So everybody, come on, every boy and girl, let's go. Let's give this a whirl. We're making waves, no stopping, keep moving along. Making waves, everybody, all people belong. We got a lot of life to live and a lot of love to give. We're making waves. Yeah, we're making waves. Come on, we're making waves. All right, y'all, sing it like this. We're gonna make some waves today. Share your love around the world. Make some waves today. Share your love around the world. Sing it again, like make some waves today. Share your love around the world. Make some waves today. Share your love around the world. We're making waves, no stopping, keep moving along. Making waves, everybody, all people belong. We got a lot of life to live and a lot of love to give. We're making waves, no stopping, keep moving along. Making waves, everybody, all people belong. We got a lot of life to live and a lot of love to give. We're making waves, yeah. Come on, y'all. We're making waves. Let's make some waves, y'all. We're making waves.
Our lesson today comes from the book of Philippians, and Philippians is actually the same book that our memory verse is from, but today's lesson comes from the book of Philippians, and this was a letter written to another church by someone named Paul. Now, you might have heard about Paul. He wrote a lot of the New Testament, and he had a pretty big role in the Bible. He was around right after Jesus had gone back up to heaven. And so we are going to learn what Paul had to say about when Jesus was here on earth.
Now it's time for
The story before the story.
Today, we're in Philippians, the 11th book in the New Testament. Philippians is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the young church he started in the Greek city of Philippi.
But before Paul way back in the beginning, out of a deep, deep love, God made an amazing world.
But when people turned away from God, the world was broken.
God made a plan to draw people back into relationship. So at the right time, God's very own son, Jesus, came to live among us. When Jesus grew up, he traveled from town to town, teaching and healing.
But the religious leaders made plans to get rid of him. Jesus was crucified on a cross and died.
But early Sunday morning, Jesus returned to life, and lots of his friends saw him.
Which is where our story starts.
Hey everyone, I'm Chloe.
Hi, Chloe.
For 40 days after his resurrection, Jesus spent time with his friends. Then he returned to heaven to be with God. But the news about Jesus spread. More and more people began to follow Jesus, including Paul. Paul traveled all over, starting brand new churches. On one of his journeys, he spent 3 months in the Greek city of Philippi, where he shared the news about Jesus with a businesswoman named Lydia. Lydia welcomed the new church to meet in her home, and it grew quickly, even after Paul was thrown in prison. Paul was released and continued his travels. Several more times, he was jailed for sharing about Jesus, but he used his time in prison to write letters to the new churches. In a letter from Rome, Paul encouraged the Philippians to put others ahead of themselves.
Don't do anything only to get ahead. Don't do it because you are proud. Instead, be humble. Value others more than yourselves. None of you should look out for just your own good. Each of you should also look out for the good of others. As you deal with one another, you should think and act as Jesus did.
Jesus is our model. Like the Philippians, we can begin to think and act like Jesus. So let's take a look at some of the things Jesus did. Jesus showed humility by always talking to God first.
Our Father in heaven, may your name be honored.
Jesus spent time alone with God, over and over. Jesus took time away from the crowds to ask God for help. He did it before starting his ministry, before choosing his disciples, and before giving up his life on the cross. Jesus submitted all his desires and plans to God. Next, Jesus showed humility by spending time with those who seemed unimportant.
Come, follow me.
Rather than choosing the most important, well-educated people to be his followers, Jesus chose the overlooked and the outcast. He wasn't worried about looking impressive. Jesus said to show humility by giving in secret.
When you give to needy people, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Then your giving will be done secretly.
That just means when you do something good for others, do it quietly. Don't make it a big deal and do it for show so people will think you're all that. Jesus also said to show humility in our relationships by doing more than is required.
Suppose someone forces you to go 1 mile. Go 2 miles with them.
Jesus taught that when you're told to do something, do it with a great attitude, and then do even more than you have to. In the end, Jesus gave us the most incredible example of humility ever. Paul wrote,
In his very nature, he was God. Jesus was equal with God. But Jesus didn't take advantage of that fact. Instead, he made himself nothing. He did this by taking on the nature of a servant. He was made just like human beings. He was humble and obeyed God completely. He did this even though it led to his death on a cross.
most of us will never be asked to actually die for someone. But every day, we can look for opportunities to set aside the things we want in order to put others first. Because Jesus puts us first. The end.
Gotta be honest, this one is hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so easy to default to what I want and what I need.
That's right. It takes practice to pay attention to what other people need. And then to find ways of putting them first.
So, what's our part in this story?
Well, because Jesus put us first, we can live forever with him. Instead of living for ourselves, we have the freedom to put others first, just like Jesus did.
Just like how Jesus spent time with people who weren't considered important, you can look for the kid that's trying to make a friend, instead of trying to get the popular kids to like you.
Or like Jesus said to give in secret, you could quietly share a snack with a friend who doesn't have one, and you don't have to make a big deal about it.
When your mom asks you to take out the trash, you can take it out and then also empty the dishwasher, just like how Jesus said to go the extra mile.
None of this is easy to do in our own strength. That's why it's so important to do something else Jesus did.
Pray!
Exactly. Jesus talked to God first, before anything else.
When we take time to do that, we remember how amazing it is that Jesus put us first. Then God can give us the creativity and strength so that we can put others first.
I think you've got it. See you next time.
Bye, Chloe.
Paul teaches us a lot about Jesus, and in this letter in the book of Philippians, he is giving us lots of examples of how Jesus was humble, and he also gave us some examples of how we can be humble. So how can you practice humility this week? How can you be humble and put someone else's wants or needs ahead of your own wants? How do you think you can do that this week? Before we go, I want to talk about our memory verse for the month. So our memory verse comes from the book of Philippians, chapter 2, verse 3. And so if you actually read the Bible verses that our lesson was about today, you'll read our memory verse today, which I think is pretty cool. So our memory verse is Philippians 2, 3. And it says, "Don't do anything only to get ahead. Don't do it because you are proud. Instead, be humble. Value others more than yourselves." So that is our memory verse for today, and I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.